I want to welcome you to Sinclair Lewis Boyhood Home on behalf of the Sinclair Lewis Foundation. Pearl asked Buck when she came to Sauk Centre to see this house. She looked at it and said, how can such a fiery, honest, impatient spirit come from such a plain, ordinary home? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to show you this house and how this house impacted the spirit of Sinclair Lewis. That led him to go on to be one of Minnesota's greatest writers, one of the nation's greatest writers, and renowned throughout the world. Sinclair Lewis was an American author who was born here in Sauk Centre in 1885. He grew up in Sauk Centre, went to high school in Sauk Centre, graduated in 1902, went to Yale. Throughout his entire life, he wanted to be a writer from as early as 10 years old, and he did just that. In 1920, he wrote Main Street, which was the most popular novel to be out up to that time. In the 1920s, he wrote 5 blockbuster novels. He was the Babe Ruth of writing in the 1920s. In 1930, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, the first American to do that. He was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 3 times. Twice he didn't make it, and the 3rd time he rejected it. His novels were not popular because they were sweet little novels, they were popular because they were controversial. He questioned society as it was. Main Street questioned small towns, Babbitt, the business ethic of America, Aerosmith, medical institutions. Elmer Gantry, of course, was a religious satire, and then Dodsworth was about Americans abroad. But he also had books on the possibility of a dictatorship in America, and it can't happen here. The role of women in society was a theme of several of his books. Most of the women in his life were active in the suffrage movement. Both his wives were suffragettes. He had a close friendship with Frances Perkins, who was the first woman to serve on the U.S. cabinet. And a lot of the protagonists in his books, the women, were suffragettes. Carol Kennicott in Main Street was very much like his mother, Isabel. Now we're coming into the parlor, which was a popular place for the family to gather. But it was also a difficult place because Lewis's birth mother, Emma, who was a sickly woman. She suffered from tuberculosis from the time he was born, which created a distance. She was weak, she coughed, she couldn't be as attentive as most mothers are. And she was also sent away to the Southwest to heal for 2 winters. And she came back in the winter when Lewis was 6 years old and just didn't recover. So a year after Emma died, Dr. E.J. Lewis married Isabel Warner from Chicago, a woman that he knew when he was in medical school. And Isabel was a red-haired tornado. She was 40 years old, she was glad for the opportunity to be a mother and a wife and active in society. And she organized a group called the Datum Society. And that was a women's group that met here in this small parlor. And she was also very active in the Carnegie Library we have in town here. She helped build that, her and her husband. Now let me take you into the kitchen. They had a coal-burning stove in the house. They didn't need wood to heat the house, but they needed a little bit of wood to run the cook stove. So his father wanted to give him something to do, teach him a work ethic, give him something physical to get him off the couch instead of reading so much. So he would order wood and have it delivered in the backyard. And Lewis had to cut wood, like sometimes a quart a day he'd be cutting wood and chopping wood. It was kind of his Abraham Lincoln experience. Now the backyard of the Lewis home also had a lot of significance in what the future author would become. Because it was back here where Lewis played. It's where he chopped all that wood that he had to chop. And there's an interesting story about this wood chopping, because he would set up the piece of wood there, ready to be chopped, but he also had a book in the fork of a tree. So he'd read a little bit, come back, chop a little bit, read a little bit, chalk a little bit. Sometimes he'd be back here mowing the lawn, and he would mow a strip, lie down and read, mow another strip, lie down and read, back and forth. So he did a lot of reading in this backyard, which was influential. And in that reading were stories of adventure and excitement, Kipling and Stevenson and so forth. So he'd be back here, and in the carriage house they had keys. He had a collection of keys and clothespins and sticks, and he'd have adventures out here like any young kid would do. Sauk Centre had a major influence on Sinclair Lewis's career. You know, it gave him those values that are inherent in small town life. You know, although he might have been critical of some of those and satirized some of those, he lived many of them. His early novels reflect small town life. He was all of his life, his wife said he was always a small town guy. But also he had, but he had some difficulties with Sauk Centre. Growing up, he was an awkward child, tall, gangly, acne, intellectual, and he didn't fit in with the boys. He wasn't a guy to go to a pickup baseball game. Most of his friends in Sauk Centre were like him. They were nerds, they were bookworms. They read, they dreamed of greater things. And that's what he did. He dreamt of bigger and better things. And from the time he was 10 years old, he talked about writing great novels, like the ones he had read. The Kipling, Treasure Island, and all those great stories that he read in his father's library. He wanted to be a writer like that, and he dedicated his life to do it. We all have dreams, and very few of us ever make those dreams. But he had that tenacity, that discipline to do just that. Lewis made several trips back to Minnesota, but very few to Sauk Centre. By the time he became an adult, his family was gone, his friends were gone, he didn't know that many people, and he got some kickback from Main Street and Babbitt and a lot of his books, so he didn't think he was very popular. But when he did, he was well received. The time he spent in Minnesota was primarily in Duluth, St. Paul. He taught briefly at the University of Minnesota, Mankato, Fergus Falls. He once thought about building a home near Vining in what we call the Fulton Hills. But mostly, he was a very restless man. He was always on the move. By the time he got established in a home, he was ready to move on to the next one. It would have been nice if he could have stayed in Sauk Centre and in Minnesota, which he came back to many times, but he always left, came back and left. He loved Minnesota, he loved Sauk Centre. He revealed it in his writings, you can tell it. But he was too restless to stay. He had to move. In the very end, when he died, he wanted to come back home finally at the cemetery here next to his parents and be there forever.
This program on Pioneer Public Television is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org. The Arrowwood Resort and Conference Center, your ideal choice for Minnesota resorts, offering luxury townhomes, 18 holes of golf, Darling Reflections Spa, Big Splash Water Park, and much more. Alexandria, Minnesota. Explore hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for a great vacation or a place to hold an event. ExploreAlex.com. Tri-State Brain and Spine Institute, with locations in Alexandria, Edina, Crookston, and Maple Grove. Doctors dedicated to evaluating and treating all types of brain and spine problems, no matter how complex.